The night my marriage ended, 42 people applauded. Not politely, not awkwardly. They actually clapped. Crystal glasses raised in the air, champagne bubbles catching the chandelier light. Laughter echoing across a private dining room filled with people who had spent the last 8 years pretending I didn't belong in their world. And right in the middle of that applause, my husband slid a stack of divorce papers across the table. My name is Elena Caldwell. That night, I was 34 years old. And until the moment those papers touched the white tablecloth in front of me, I still believed my marriage could be saved. It was Christmas dinner, the Sterling family's annual celebration. 42 guests gathered inside a private room at the Lexington, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Men in tailored suits, women in silk dresses and diamonds, people who measured human value in stock portfolios and country club memberships. And then there was me, a woman who restored antique furniture for a living, a woman whose hands were permanently rough from sanding oak and walnut, a woman who had spent 8 years trying to convince her husband's family that craftsmanship counted as real work. They never believed it. To them, I was just the embarrassing mistake their son had made in his 20s. The girl who fixed broken chairs, the girl who smelled faintly of wood dust and varnish, the girl who didn't belong at their table. For 8 years, I sat through their holidays, smiling politely while they mocked my career. For 8 years, I watched my husband slowly become someone I barely recognized. And on that Christmas night, in front of 42 witnesses, he finally finished what his family had been trying to do since the day we met. He ended our marriage. Victor Sterling didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply placed a white envelope in front of me and said in a cold, quiet voice, "Just open it." I did, and the first words I saw were, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already dated. Already decided." The room went silent for half a second. Then Victor's father raised his champagne glass and announced loudly, "Finally, my son has corrected the biggest mistake of his life." And just like that, 42 people started applauding. But what none of them knew, not my husband, not his arrogant father, not anyone in that glittering room, was that inside my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license, there was a black card, a card my uncle had given me 16 years earlier, a card he told me to use only when I truly needed it. And when I did, they'll know exactly who you are. That night, for the first time in my life, I decided to use it. And within 10 minutes, the entire room would learn a truth that would destroy everything they thought they knew about me. I was 25 when I met Victor Sterling. It was late summer, the kind of evening that makes ordinary places feel almost enchanted. The county fair was crowded and noisy, full of children running with sticky fingers, teenagers daring each other onto rides, and the smell of fried dough drifting through the warm air, like something out of a memory you haven't lived yet. Strings of yellow lights hung over the walkways. Music bled faintly from somewhere near the game booths. The Ferris wheel turned slowly against a pink-orange sky. That was where I met him, by the Ferris wheel. I remember that part so clearly because it still hurts how beautiful it was. Victor was charming in that effortless way some people are born with. He had that clean, polished confidence I usually distrusted, but that night he didn't feel fake. He made me laugh within 5 minutes. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He didn't glance over my shoulder for someone more important. He didn't act embarrassed when I told him I restored antique furniture and spent most days covered in sawdust. Instead, he smiled. "Seriously?" he said, leaning against the rail beside me. "That's incredible. You take something people gave up on and bring it back to life." I laughed a little. "That's one way to romanticize stripping paint for 6 hours. "No," he said, and his voice softened. "I mean it. There's something real about that." Real. That was the word he used a lot in those early days. He told me he was tired of the world he came from, tired of trust fund conversations, tired of shallow people pretending money made them interesting. He said being with me felt like breathing different air, said he liked that I made things with my hands, said I saw beauty where other people only saw damage. When he took my hand that night, it felt natural. When we stood talking for 4 straight hours while the fair slowly emptied around us, it felt like the beginning of something rare. And for a while, it really was. Back then, Victor seemed different from his family. He wore expensive clothes, yes. He came from money, yes. But when it was just the two of us, he didn't feel like a Sterling. He felt like a man trying to escape the weight of his own last name. We fell in love too fast. I can admit that now. There's a kind of speed that feels romantic when you're inside it, and reckless when you look back. Within 2 years, we were standing in a courthouse getting married in a ceremony so small the entire guest list could have fit into one car. I had wanted to give him more. A better ring, a bigger day, something that matched the world he came from. But I was still building my business. I worked out of a rented workshop with mismatched shelves, secondhand tools, and old wooden pieces waiting for resurrection. My income was steady but modest, honest but not glamorous. Victor held my face in both hands the night before the wedding and said, "Elena, I don't care about any of that. I want you, not a performance." I believed him. God, I believed him. His parents barely showed up to the courthouse. His father, Garrison Sterling, arrived late and looked irritated to be there at all. His mother, Margot, wore a pale suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and spent the entire ceremony with the expression of a woman enduring an unpleasant dental procedure. I remember trying to ignore it. I remember telling myself, not every family is warm. I remember wanting so badly to believe love could survive contempt. My first real dinner at the Sterling estate should have warned me what was coming. Their house wasn't really a house. It was a statement. White columns, a circular driveway, old money architecture designed to make visitors feel small before they even stepped inside. Everything about it said power, generational power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it assumes the whole world already knows. Within 5 minutes of meeting me properly, Garrison asked, "So, what exactly do you do for a living?" "I restore antique furniture," I said. He threw his head back and laughed, actually laughed. Then he turned toward his wife and said, "So our son is marrying a handyman?" Margot smiled in that elegant, bloodless way she had. "How quaint," she said. I had never heard one word sound so insulting in my life. Later that evening, I passed a hallway and overheard her speaking quietly to Victor. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked. "You still have time to correct it." When we got home, Victor was furious on my behalf. He paced the kitchen, jaw tight, telling me they were wrong, telling me they didn't know me, telling me none of it mattered. "I love you exactly as you are," he said. And at the time, I believed that too. That was the man I married. That was the version of Victor Sterling I built my life around. What I didn't understand then was that families like his don't always destroy things all at once. Sometimes they do it slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. And by the time you realize what's been happening, the person you fell in love with is already gone. The first year of our marriage was still good. Not perfect, but good enough that I believed we could build a life together. Victor and I rented a small house near my workshop. The floors creaked when you walked across them. The kitchen cabinets were older than both of us, and the backyard fence leaned slightly to the left like it had given up on staying straight. But it was ours. On weekends, I restored furniture while Victor read on the porch or helped me sand pieces in the yard. He used to joke that he was becoming an expert in the difference between oak and walnut. Sometimes he would run his fingers across a table I'd finished and say quietly, "You know this is art, right?" Those were the moments that kept me believing. But the Sterling family never stopped reminding us where I stood in their hierarchy. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday dinner. The pattern repeated itself with exhausting precision. Garrison Sterling had a special talent for humiliation disguised as conversation. At the dining table, he would lean back in his chair, swirl his wine slowly, and casually bring up the achievements of other men in the family. "My colleague's son-in-law just made partner at a law firm," he would say loudly. Or, "Did you hear about the Kenton's daughter? She married a neurosurgeon last year. Then he would glance at me, just a glance. Long enough for everyone to understand the comparison. Margot preferred a more delicate cruelty. She never raised her voice, never openly insulted me. Instead, she would place her hand gently over Victor's and say things like, "I just worry about your long-term security, darling. A woman needs stability in her life." Or she would look at me with that thin smile and say, "Furniture restoration must be such a charming hobby." Hobby. The word always landed like a quiet slap. And then there was Victor's younger brother, Kieran Sterling, 29 years old. Never worked a real job in his entire life, but somehow convinced he was qualified to judge everyone else. Kieran had a particular fondness for introducing me to people at gatherings. "Oh, this is Elena," he'd say with a smirk, "my brother's wife." Then he'd pause just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. "She fixes old chairs." The first few years, Victor defended me. I remember that clearly. Under the table, he would squeeze my hand when his father started one of his speeches. Later, in the car, he would apologize. "They're snobs," he'd say. "They'll come around." Those moments mattered more than he probably realized, because they told me he was still on my side. But time has a strange way of wearing people down. The changes didn't happen overnight. They happened slowly. So slowly that at first I didn't even notice. First, the hand squeezes stopped. Victor would sit quietly during dinner, while his father made jokes about real men building real businesses. Then the apologies disappeared. When we drove home after those gatherings, the car rides became silent instead of comforting. And eventually, Victor started looking at me the same way his parents did. Not with anger, not with cruelty, something worse, disappointment. By our 6th year of marriage, the house that once felt warm started to feel like a waiting room. We barely talked during dinner. Victor spent more evenings at his parents' estate than at home, and when I finally asked him what was wrong, he didn't argue. He didn't yell. He simply said one sentence in a flat voice, "Nothing." Then he walked away. I tried to fix things. God knows, I tried. I took on more restoration projects than my body could handle. I worked late into the night in my workshop, sanding, staining, rebuilding pieces until my hands ached. Part of me believed if I could just earn more money, if I could just prove I was successful enough, maybe the Sterlings would finally respect me. Maybe Victor would look at me the way he used to. But the harder I worked, the colder my marriage became. The moment that finally broke something inside me happened 2 nights before Christmas last year. I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen when I heard Victor's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard him say something that stopped me completely. "I know, Mom," he said quietly. A pause. Then, "You were right about her." I stood there in the dark hallway, my hand frozen against the wall. Victor continued speaking. "I should have listened to you from the beginning." My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. He had no idea I was standing there. He had no idea I heard every word. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, while the man I had loved for 9 years slept peacefully beside me. And for the first time, I started to feel like I was standing at the edge of something final, something I couldn't stop. I just didn't know yet how dramatic that ending would be, or that the moment my husband decided to erase me from his life would be the exact moment everything I thought I knew about my own life was about to change. Christmas night arrived with a kind of quiet tension that felt almost physical. Victor and I drove to the Lexington in complete silence. The car heater hummed softly, filling the space with warm air, but it didn't make the silence any less heavy. Outside, the streets were dusted with fresh snow, the city glowing under strings of holiday lights. Families hurried along sidewalks, carrying wrapped presents and laughing into the cold. Inside the car, it felt like we were already miles apart. Victor wore a tailored charcoal coat and the expensive watch his father had given him years ago. Everything about him looked polished, successful, composed. I wore my only formal dress, simple, dark green, elegant, in a quiet way. The kind of dress that wouldn't attract attention in a room full of diamonds. When we arrived at the restaurant, the doorman opened the car door and greeted Victor immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling." Not Mr. and Mrs. Just him. The Lexington was the kind of place where everything looked expensive without trying too hard. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings. White marble floors reflected the warm golden light like mirrors. Waiters moved between tables in perfectly tailored uniforms, silent and efficient. The moment we walked in, I felt it. That familiar feeling. The one that whispered, "You don't belong here." Garrison Sterling had reserved a private dining room for the family's annual Christmas dinner. When we stepped inside, the long table was already filling with relatives. 42 guests. Aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates, friends of the family who had known Victor since childhood. Every seat connected by blood, money, or social ambition. And at the head of the table sat Garrison Sterling, surveying the room like a king inspecting his court. He wore a navy suit so perfectly tailored, it probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Beside him sat Margot, draped in silk and pearls, smiling politely as she greeted each guest. Kieran was already there too, slouched lazily in his chair, with a glass of whiskey in one hand and his phone in the other. Victor walked ahead of me without waiting and took the seat beside his mother. I followed quietly and sat next to him. No one asked how I was. No one greeted me. After 8 years, I was used to that. Dinner began with the same conversations that always filled Sterling gatherings. Vacations in Italy, investment portfolios, new luxury cars, someone's son getting into Harvard, someone else's daughter marrying a hedge fund manager making 7 figures. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I pushed food around my plate and tried to stay invisible. Then Garrison spoke. "Elena." His voice was loud enough that the entire table turned to look at me. "How's the furniture business this year?" A few people chuckled before I even answered. I forced a small smile. "It's been a steady year." Garrison leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine dramatically. "Steady," he repeated. That's a diplomatic way of saying barely surviving, isn't it? A ripple of laughter spread down the table. He continued casually. "I had lunch with Bradley Kenton last week. You remember him, Margot? The cardiac surgeon?" Margot nodded elegantly. "Of course. He just bought a house in the hills," Garrison said. "Paid $4 million in cash." Then he looked directly at me. "So tell us, Elena, what did you buy this year?" A pause. Then Kieran leaned forward with a grin. "A new screwdriver set?" The table exploded with laughter. I kept my expression calm. 8 years had taught me that reacting only made things worse. Margot leaned toward me with a sympathetic smile. "We're not trying to be cruel, dear," she said softly. "We just worry about Victor's future. A man deserves stability, a partner who contributes equally." The meaning was perfectly clear. "You are not enough." Kieran lifted his glass dramatically. "Well," he said loudly, "at least Elena's consistent." He smirked. "Consistently broke." More laughter. I stared down at my plate, gripping my fork tightly enough that my knuckles turned white. "Just a few more hours," I told myself. "Then you can go home." Then Victor moved. Without looking at me, he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a white envelope and slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of me. The room slowly went quiet. "What is this?" I asked softly. Victor still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just open it." My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. I only needed to read the first line. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already dated 2 weeks earlier." My vision blurred. "You're divorcing me?" I whispered. "And you're doing this here?" Victor finally looked at me. His face was completely cold. "I should have done it years ago," he said. "My father was right." The room was silent. "You're never going to be anything, Elena." The words hit me like a physical blow. Before I could respond, Garrison slammed his palm on the table. "Finally," he announced triumphantly, "my son has come to his senses." He lifted his champagne glass high. "Elena," he said loudly, "I'll be generous. You have until February to collect whatever pathetic belongings you have from the house." He smiled. "After that, you'll be exactly where you belong." He raised the glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to Victor's freedom from this mistake." Glasses rose. 42 people lifted their drinks. And then They started applauding the destruction of my marriage. The sound filled the room, echoing off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Victor didn't look at me. Margot smiled calmly. Kieran laughed into his drink. And in that moment, something inside me went completely still. I thought about 8 years of silence, 8 years of humiliation, 8 years of trying to prove I was worthy of love. Then I remembered something. A black card. A card my Uncle Silas had given me 16 years ago. The card I had carried in my wallet every day since I turned 18. Don't use it unless you truly need it, he had told me. And when you do, they'll know exactly who you are. For the first time in 8 years, I reached for my wallet. The applause slowly faded, but the sound kept ringing inside my ears. 42 people had just celebrated the collapse of my marriage like it was a successful business deal. For a few seconds, I simply sat there, my hands resting on the white tablecloth, my breathing slow, strangely calm. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Something inside me had moved past that point already. I looked around the table. Garrison was accepting congratulations like a man who had just closed a major corporate acquisition. Margot leaned toward Victor, whispering something approving in his ear. Kieran was already scrolling through his phone again, laughing quietly with a cousin. They had already moved on. To them, I was finished. Erased. A problem solved. And that realization did something unexpected. It made everything suddenly very clear. I reached for the envelope again, folded the divorce papers carefully, and slipped them into my purse. My hands no longer trembled. The shaking had stopped completely. A waiter approached our section of the table at that moment, collecting empty plates. He was young, professional, polite in that polished way high-end restaurants train their staff. I raised my hand slightly. "Excuse me." He stopped immediately. "Yes, ma'am. How may I assist you?" "I'd like to pay for the table," I said calmly. He blinked once. "The entire table." A brief pause. Then he said gently, "Ma'am, this is a party of 42 guests. I'm aware. The bill may be quite substantial." "That's fine." Before he could answer, Garrison's voice cut across the table. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. "I'm paying for dinner." The room stirred with quiet amusement. Garrison leaned back in his chair and laughed loudly. "Did everyone hear that?" He gestured toward me dramatically. "Elena wants to pay for dinner." Several guests chuckled immediately. "The furniture repair girl wants to cover a bill that's probably larger than her annual income." More laughter rippled around the table. Kieran nearly spilled his drink laughing. "Oh wow," he said. "Maybe she plans to work it off in the kitchen." Margot shook her head slowly, pretending to be sympathetic. "Elena," she said softly, "there's really no need to embarrass yourself further." Then Victor finally spoke. His voice carried irritation now. "Stop this." I looked at him. "Stop what?" "This," he said, gesturing toward the waiter. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" I repeated quietly. "You're already humiliating yourself enough tonight." I held his gaze for a moment. Then I turned back to the waiter. "Please bring the bill." The waiter hesitated. His eyes flicked nervously toward Garrison, clearly recognizing who normally paid for events like this. But I spoke again, calmly. "It's fine." He nodded. "Of course, ma'am." He disappeared through a door near the back of the room. The table erupted into quiet murmurs again. Kieran leaned across toward me with a grin. "So what's the plan?" he said. "Credit card with a $500 limit?" A few cousins snickered. Garrison lifted his glass again. "This should be entertaining." Victor sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Elena, just stop." But I had already opened my purse and taken out my wallet. It was an old wallet. Dark brown leather, worn thin from years of use. Nothing about it looked impressive. Inside were the same things that had always been there. My driver's license. A few normal cards. And behind them, the black card. I had carried it for 16 years. My Uncle Silas had given it to me on my 18th birthday. No logo, no bank name, no numbers, just matte black metal, and his name engraved in silver letters. Silas Hartley. I remembered that day clearly. We had been sitting on the porch of his small cabin deep in the woods. The air smelled like pine and sawdust from the workshop where he had taught me everything I knew about wood restoration. He had handed me the card without explanation. "Keep this with you," he told me. "For what?" I asked. Don't use it unless you truly need it. I had turned the card over in my hands, confused. What happens if I do? He smiled and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. When you use it, they'll know exactly who you are. At the time, I thought it was just one of his strange philosophical lessons. For 16 years, the card stayed in my wallet untouched. Even after he passed away 3 years ago, even after life became difficult, I never used it. Until that moment. The waiter returned, carrying the bill inside a black leather folder. He placed it in front of me carefully. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am." I didn't even open it. Instead, I slid the black card out of my wallet and handed it to him. "Use this." He took it automatically, the way someone takes hundreds of credit cards every night. But the moment his eyes landed on it, he froze. Completely. His expression changed instantly. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. He looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card again. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Is something wrong?" I asked calmly. He swallowed hard. "Ma'am, please excuse me for just a moment. I need to speak with the manager." He turned and walked away quickly, almost running. The door marked private closed behind him. Garrison snorted. "Well, that answers that." He leaned back smugly. Card declined. The table chuckled again. Victor shook his head in embarrassment. "Elena, this is exactly why I had to do this." I didn't respond. I simply folded my hands calmly on the table and waited. 2 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. The waiter returned, but he wasn't alone. Walking behind him was an older man in an immaculate charcoal suit, perfect posture, silver hair, an expression of absolute authority. His name tag read, Mr. Peyton, General Manager. He walked directly toward our table, ignored everyone else in the room, and stopped directly in front of me. Then he extended his hand. "Miss Caldwell?" I stood slowly and shook it. "Yes?" His voice carried deep respect. "Ma'am, I must apologize. If we had known you were coming tonight, we would have prepared very differently." Behind me, I heard chairs shift. The room had gone completely silent. The moment the manager spoke my name, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Not dramatically at first, just a small ripple. But it was enough to make people stop talking. The Sterling family wasn't used to seeing staff treat someone else at the table with more respect than them. Garrison leaned forward, irritation flashing across his face. "What exactly is going on here?" he demanded. The manager didn't look at him, not even briefly. His attention remained entirely on me. "I'm terribly sorry for the delay, Ms. Caldwell," he said with calm professionalism. "We had to verify something with our legal department." A murmur spread across the table. "Legal department?" Victor frowned. "Verify what?" he asked sharply. But again, the manager ignored him. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed the black card the waiter had taken earlier. He held it with both hands, respectfully, almost ceremonially. Then he returned it to me. "Your uncle left very specific instructions for us." My heart thudded once in my chest. "My uncle?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Silas Hartley." The name moved through the room like a quiet shockwave. Most of the guests didn't react, but Garrison did. His eyes narrowed. "Silas Hartley?" he repeated slowly. I noticed the change immediately. For the first time that evening, the confidence in his expression flickered. The manager nodded. "Yes, sir." Then he turned back to me. "Miss Caldwell, according to the estate documentation we have on record, the moment you presented this card, we were required to activate the protocols your uncle established." My mind was racing now. "What protocols?" The manager leaned slightly closer. His voice lowered, but the room was so quiet that every word carried clearly across the table. "Full ownership verification." A pause. "And transfer confirmation." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" He spoke gently. "Your uncle founded Hartley Hospitality Group 42 years ago." Someone down the table inhaled sharply. The name meant something to them. I didn't yet understand why. "He built the company from a single small restaurant," the manager continued. "Over several decades, it expanded into one of the most respected hospitality groups in the country." He gestured subtly around the room. "The Lexington is our flagship location." My pulse quickened. The group currently operates 37 restaurants and 12 luxury hotels across the United States. Silence fell again. The kind of silence where people stop breathing. Then the manager said the sentence that changed everything. When Mr. Hartley passed away 3 years ago, full ownership of Hartley Hospitality Group transferred to his sole heir. He looked directly at me. You. The room froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It felt as if the air itself had thickened. Garrison's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. Margot blinked slowly, her composed expression cracking. Kieran dropped his phone. It hit the table with a loud clatter. Victor stared at me like I had suddenly become a stranger. The manager continued calmly, unaware of the chaos unfolding around him. Your uncle deliberately lived a very private life. He avoided publicity and instructed our legal team not to inform you about the inheritance until you chose to activate the card. I shook my head slightly. I didn't know any of this. That was intentional, he said. Mr. Hartley believed you should live your life freely before stepping into this responsibility. Across the table, Garrison slammed his hand down. This is ridiculous. His voice was sharp now. Absolutely ridiculous. He pointed directly at me. She restores furniture in a rented workshop. He looked at the manager like he was correcting a mistake. There's no way this woman owns anything. The manager finally turned toward him. His politeness remained, but the warmth had disappeared. Sir, he said calmly, our legal department has already verified Miss Caldwell's identity through multiple records. He paused. There is no mistake. He turned back to me. As of this morning's valuation, your net worth exceeds $400 million. The number landed on the table like an explosion. 400 million. For a moment, no one reacted. Then the shock started spreading. Faces around the table changed rapidly. Relatives who had ignored me earlier now stared openly. Cousins who had laughed at Kieran's jokes shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margot pressed a trembling hand against her chest. Kieran grabbed his drink and drained it in one gulp. And Victor looked like someone had punched him. Finally, he spoke. Elena. His voice sounded thin. Why didn't you tell me? I turned toward him slowly. Tell you what? He couldn't finish the sentence. All these years, he said weakly. Why didn't you say anything? I looked at him carefully. Really looked. At the man who had just handed me divorce papers 10 minutes earlier. The man who told me I would never be anything. I didn't know, I said quietly. But let me ask you something. The entire table was watching now. If I had known, would it have changed anything? Victor didn't answer. I continued. You didn't divorce me because of money. You divorced me because you believed I had none. The words settled heavily across the room. Your family spent 8 years treating me like I was beneath them. I turned my gaze toward Garrison, and you enjoyed every minute of it. His jaw tightened. You measured my worth by my bank account, I said. But here's the funny thing. I leaned back slightly. You were wrong about the number. No one laughed this time. I stood slowly. The chair legs scraped softly against the marble floor. I loved you, Victor, I said calmly. I would have worked every day of my life to build something real with you. I glanced around the table, but tonight showed me something important. Then I looked directly at Garrison. You told me I'd be homeless by February. His expression hardened. That's right. I nodded. That's interesting. I paused. Because according to Mr. Payton, my company owns the building where your dealership headquarters operates. The color drained from his face. Silence. You're my tenant, I finished. The room felt like it might implode. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, but emotionally. The air inside the private dining room had turned heavy, like the oxygen itself was struggling to move between 42 stunned people. No one laughed anymore. No one made jokes. The Sterling family, who had spent the entire evening speaking with effortless confidence, suddenly looked uncertain. I could see it in their faces. Shock, confusion, and something else. Fear. But strangely, none of that gave me satisfaction. I thought it would. For 8 years, I had imagined moments like this. Moments where the people who mocked me would finally be forced to see me differently. But standing there in that room, watching their expressions collapse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Deeply tired. Because wealth hadn't changed the most important thing. My marriage was still over. Victor was still the man who had slid divorce papers across the table in front of 42 people. I looked at him again. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but the certainty he carried earlier had vanished. "Elena," he said quietly. His voice no longer held authority. It held something closer to panic. "Wait." I didn't answer. He stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back. "You don't understand what just happened," he said quickly. "I didn't know about any of this." He gestured toward the manager, toward the card, toward the entire room. If I had known. I raised my hand gently. He stopped talking. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. "Victor," I said softly, "you did know everything you needed to know." The room listened. "You knew who I was. You knew how I treated you. You knew how hard I worked. You knew I loved you." I paused. And that still wasn't enough. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind him, Margot leaned forward suddenly. "Elena," she said with a careful smile, "that was all a misunderstanding." Her tone had changed dramatically. Gone was the quiet condescension. Now there was warmth. Urgent warmth. "You must understand how difficult family dynamics can be," she continued. "We were only concerned about stability." I looked at her. 8 years of subtle insults flashed through my mind. "You called my career a hobby," I said. She froze. "That wasn't what I meant. You asked Victor if he was certain about marrying me. That was years ago. You watched your husband mock me for nearly a decade." Her lips pressed together. Kieran spoke suddenly. "Elena, come on," he said, forcing a laugh. "This whole thing is crazy. We're family." Family. The word echoed strangely. I remembered every joke he had made about my job, every introduction. "She fixes chairs." "I'm not your family," I said quietly. His grin faded. Garrison finally spoke again, but his voice had lost its earlier power. "This doesn't change anything." I turned toward him. "Oh? You may have inherited money," he said stiffly, "but that doesn't make you respectable." The room held its breath. I considered his words. Then I nodded slowly. "You're right." That surprised him. Money doesn't make someone respectable. I looked around the table. But the way people treat others does. Silence. The kind that hurts. Victor stepped closer to me. "Elena, please." His voice cracked slightly. "Let's talk about this privately." For a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with 9 years ago. The man at the county fair. The man who once told me my work was art. But that version of him had disappeared long before tonight. "You had years to talk to me," I said gently. "You had thousands of chances." My chest tightened. "But the moment you thought I had nothing, you walked away." The truth settled heavily between us. Behind me, the manager stood quietly, waiting. The restaurant staff were pretending not to stare, but everyone was watching. Victor lowered his voice. "We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "No." My voice was calm, but inside, something hurt deeply. Not anger. Grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I had. Grief for the man I believed Victor used to be. Grief for the version of myself who spent 8 years trying to earn respect that should have been given freely. I picked up my coat. "Mr. Peyton," I said. "Yes, Miss Caldwell." "Please send the bill to my office." "Of course." I looked once more around the table. 42 faces. People who had applauded my humiliation only minutes earlier. "Dinner is on me," I said. "Consider it my final gift to the Sterling family." Victor took a step forward. "Elena, wait." But I was already walking toward the door. My footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. Halfway there, I stopped. Something still needed to be said. I turned back. "My uncle once told me something," I said clearly. The room went silent again. A person's worth isn't measured by money. It's measured by how they treat people when they believe those people have nothing to offer. I looked at each of them, one by one. Tonight, I learned exactly what all of you are worth. Then I walked out into the cold December night. Snow was falling softly. The air was sharp and clean. And for the first time in 8 years, I could finally breathe. The cold night air hit my face the moment I stepped outside the Lexington. Snow was falling steadily now, soft white flakes drifting down through the golden glow of the restaurant's entrance lights. For a moment, I simply stood there on the sidewalk, breathing. 8 years. 8 years of holding my breath around people who made me feel small. And suddenly, it was over. Behind the restaurant doors, I could still hear faint movement, chairs scraping, voices rising in confused conversation. The Sterling family trying to understand how their perfect narrative had collapsed in less than 10 minutes. But none of that mattered anymore. A car passed slowly on the street, tires crunching softly over the snow. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and walked toward my car. My phone buzzed. Victor. His name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment. Then I declined the call. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Each time, I pressed the same button, decline. By the time I reached the car, he had called 6 times. I silenced the phone completely. The drive home felt strangely peaceful. The city lights blurred past the windows while quiet Christmas music played on the radio. For the first time that evening, my mind had space to think about Uncle Silas, about the card, about the truth I had just learned. $400 million, 37 restaurants, 12 hotels, an entire company I didn't even know existed. But the strangest part wasn't the money. It was the timing. For 16 years, I had carried that card in my wallet without using it. Through difficult years. Through slow months in my workshop. Through nights when money was tight. And yet somehow, the moment I needed it most had arrived exactly when it was meant to. When I pulled into the driveway of the small house Victor and I had shared, the porch light was still on. For a moment, I sat in the car, looking at the house. The paint on the porch railing needed touching up. The front window still had the faint scratch I accidentally made while moving a cabinet years earlier. It had never been a fancy house, but it had been mine. I went inside quietly. The house felt strangely empty. Victor, of course he hadn't. He was probably still at the restaurant, trying to repair the social disaster that had just unfolded in front of half his extended family. I walked into the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. Not a large one. Just in clothes, documents, a few personal items. I moved without rushing, because the decision had already been made. By the time Victor returned, I would be gone. No explanations. No final fight. Just my phone vibrated again on the nightstand. Another call. Victor. This time I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his voice came through the phone, tense and breathless. Elena, where are you? At home. I'm coming back right now. You don't need to. Yes, I do, he said quickly. Everything tonight was a misunderstanding. I closed my eyes. Was it? Of course it was. No one knew about the inheritance. That's not the point. Elena, you believed I was worthless. The words landed heavily between us. That's not true. Then why did you divorce me? Silence. He tried again. My father. Your father didn't sign those papers. Another silence. I zipped the suitcase closed. You made that decision, I said quietly. And you made it before you knew about the money. His breathing grew heavier. Elena, we can fix this. I walked toward the front door. No, I said softly. We can't. You're just upset right now. I'm not upset. I stepped outside again. Snow covered the driveway now. The world looked clean, quiet. Like a fresh page. You had everything, I told him. A wife who loved you. A partner who believed in you. A life that was real. My voice stayed steady. But that wasn't enough for you. He whispered my name. Elena. But I had nothing left to say. I hope the life you chose makes you happy. Then I ended the call. I placed the phone in my pocket, loaded the suitcase into my car, and started the engine. The house faded slowly behind me as I drove away. A chapter of my life closing quietly in the falling snow. But before that chapter could fully end, there was one final detail the Sterling family had not yet realized, and it was about to change everything. because earlier that night, when the manager confirmed the ownership records, he had also confirmed something else, something Garrison Sterling would soon discover the hard way. The building that housed his luxury car dealership, the building he proudly called the cornerstone of his business empire, was leased through Hartley Properties, which meant only one thing. I was now his landlord. And the man who told me I'd be homeless by February would soon learn exactly what that date meant. The days after that Christmas dinner were the quietest of my life. Not dramatic, not chaotic, quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm when everything has already been broken and there's nothing left to argue about. I moved into a small apartment downtown temporarily. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and bright, with large windows that overlooked the river. Every morning, the winter sunlight reflected off the water and filled the room with pale gold light. For the first time in years, I woke up without tension in my chest. Victor returned to the house that night long after I had already gone. He called again the next morning. And the next. I didn't answer. By the third day, the calls stopped. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Victor's lawyers initially tried to challenge it. They argued that he had not known about my inheritance and that the financial situation of the marriage had been misrepresented. But there was one small detail they had overlooked. Years earlier, when Victor and I were engaged, Garrison Sterling himself had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. At the time, he claimed it was necessary to protect the Sterling family assets. I had signed it without hesitation. I didn't care about money. I cared about love. The irony was almost poetic. The same document designed to protect the Sterling fortune ended up protecting mine. According to the agreement, neither spouse could claim assets acquired before the marriage or inherited individually, which meant Victor had no legal claim to Hartley Hospitality Group. None. Zero. When the divorce was finalized, the settlement was exactly what Victor had originally expected me to receive. Nothing. The second consequence came 3 months later. Garrison Sterling had spent years boasting about his luxury car dealerships. They were the crown jewel of his reputation in the city. Every dinner conversation somehow circled back to them. One morning, my legal team presented me with the commercial lease records for one of Hartley Properties' buildings. The address caught my attention immediately. It was the headquarters of Sterling Luxury Motors. I didn't cancel the lease out of revenge. I simply chose not to renew it. The contract expired February 1st, exactly the date Garrison had mentioned during Christmas dinner, the date he said I would be homeless. When his office received the notice, the reaction was immediate. My assistant informed me that Garrison called the corporate office 3 separate times, demanding to speak with me personally. I declined. A week later, he attempted to schedule a formal meeting through his lawyers. I declined that too. Eventually, the dealership relocated to a much smaller property on the outskirts of the city. Within a year, 2 of the company's 4 locations had quietly closed. The man who once laughed at my career repairing old furniture now spent most of his time trying to prevent his own business from collapsing. Margot contacted me 6 months after the divorce. Her message arrived as a carefully written letter delivered to my office. 3 pages, elegant handwriting, full of apologies. She explained that she had always secretly admired my work ethic, that she regretted how things had unfolded, that Garrison's behavior had never reflected her true feelings. At the end of the letter, she asked if I would be willing to meet for coffee so we could start fresh as family. I read the letter once, then folded it neatly and dropped it into the trash. Some bridges cannot be rebuilt. Kieran reached out too. But he used a different strategy. He sent a message through social media. Friendly. Casual. Almost cheerful. Hey, Elena. Been a long time. Crazy how life turns out, huh? I've been working on some business ideas and thought maybe we could talk. Maybe you'd be interested in investing? I stared at the message for a few seconds, then blocked his account. 8 years of mockery had not earned him a meeting. Victor waited the longest. 4 months passed before he contacted me again. It was a Tuesday night. My phone rang while I was reviewing renovation plans for one of the company's hotels. When I saw his name, I hesitated. Then I answered. His voice sounded completely different, quieter. broken in a way I had never heard before. Elena. There was a long pause. I made a mistake. I leaned back in my chair. Which one? All of it, he said. I didn't realize what I had. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word. I let my family influence me. I let their expectations shape how I saw things. I convinced myself you weren't enough. Another silence. But you were. His voice cracked slightly. You were everything. I listened without interrupting. I still love you, he said finally. Is there any chance we could try again? For a moment, the past flashed through my mind. The county fair. The Ferris wheel. The version of Victor who once believed in me. But that memory belonged to a different life. You had everything, Victor, I said quietly. A partner who loved you and stood beside you when you thought she had nothing. That was worth more than any amount of money. I paused. But you couldn't see it. Another silence filled the line. And now, I continued, I can't unsee the way you looked at me that night. The night he handed me divorce papers. The night 42 people applauded. I hope you find happiness, I said gently. But it won't be with me. I ended the call. And I never heard from him again. Taking over Hartley Hospitality Group changed my life, but not in the way people expected. Most people assumed I would move into some enormous penthouse, hire assistants to manage everything, and spend my days making decisions from a corner office high above the city. That wasn't what I did. Instead, I visited every single restaurant, all 37 of them. I walked through the kitchens, introduced myself to the chefs, and sat down with servers during their breaks. I met housekeepers in the hotels, maintenance teams, receptionists, valets, the people who actually made the company work every single day. I learned their names. I asked about their families. I listened. Because that was how Uncle Silas had always lived. Quietly. Respectfully. Treating people like human beings instead of positions on a payroll sheet. And every weekend, no matter how busy the company became, I still returned to my workshop. The smell of wood and varnish grounded me. Restoring furniture reminded me who I had been before everything changed. The woman who believed beauty could be rebuilt from things people had given up on. About a year after that Christmas dinner, I was sanding an old oak table when I noticed something unusual. A small drawer hidden underneath the frame. The wood had warped over time, sealing it shut. Curious, I pried it open carefully. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. Elena. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter inside was from Uncle Silas. Elena, if you're reading this, it means you finally used the card. I never told you about the money because I wanted you to grow into a good person on your own terms. Anyone can appear kind when they're rich. The real test is how someone treats others when they have nothing. I watched you your whole life. I watched you work hard, stay humble, and love people without conditions. That's why everything belongs to you now. Not because you needed it, but because you deserved it. Use it wisely. Stay good. And remember this one thing. The people who love you when you have nothing are the only people worth keeping when you have everything. I'm proud of you. Love, Uncle Silas. I sat in that workshop for a long time holding that letter. For years, I had allowed other people to decide my value. People who measured worth using money, status, and appearances. But Uncle Silas understood something they never did. Character is the real wealth. Kindness is the real legacy. That Christmas dinner didn't change my life because I became rich. It changed my life because it showed me something much more important. The people who mocked me weren't powerful. They were poor in ways money could never fix. And if you're listening to this story right now, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or dismissed by people who believed they were better than you, remember this. Your worth is never determined by the people who fail to recognize it. Stay true to who you are. Keep building your life with honesty and dignity, because one day the world will see exactly what you were worth all along.